Sure.
It's not complex.
It's pretty simple. I put it in here somewhere, I thought.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to the Wednesday, October 8, 2014 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. First item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of September 24th.
Move to approve.
I second.
Okay.
Or you already did.
Nels moved, Wednesday second. I have one correction. It would be on page 2 of 3. The second full paragraph begins, Hamilton explained that at the last meeting, and it ends on the line, with the line, he is now uncomfortable with the proposed amendment and moved approval. I believe he had gotten comfortable.
Yeah,
with
I
it.
think that's correct. I didn't notice that one.
Good catch.
Yeah.
That was the only thing that I saw.
I don't know how relevant his comfort is to the whole.
Well, but he moved, so
Yeah.
there we go. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any other observations or corrections? All in favor of approval of the minutes of September 24th, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it doesn't look like anybody needs to abstain from the attendance list. Okay, thank you. Next up is correspondence. Anything from staff?
2 items I had, or I think only one item, just report back on the citizen survey question. As you may recall, we had 2 questions that we submitted for the citizen survey. One was the kind of a multi-part question comparing kind of walkable, bikeable versus detached or larger lot subdivisions. There was one question remaining that we were going to ask that really wasn't defined by the group that Nils and I met to polish out, which was kind of a question about diversity of residents in the neighborhood. We were caught putting a multi-part question in as one, and so the real estate question on the survey. So we were asked to eliminate one of those in order to fit the survey. So I did suggest, Jen, that probably the last one was the one. It was one that they really kind of questioned what would we do kind of about that, depending upon the response. And so they asked if it would be okay if we removed that one item. One of those had to come out of that. So we did. I did say that probably was the last of the ones that we had worked on that list. And so that probably would be the one if one had to be cut to be removed. So that one did end up getting trimmed off of that larger list because we were taking up too much space.
What item was that then? What item was that?
It was a question about what type of neighborhood would they prefer.
Okay.
One that has a diversity of residents or
Right.
one that is a little
Right.
bit more uniform.
Right.
And the question, I guess, that Jen posed, compared to some of the others that were really testing smaller homes versus larger
Right.
homes, to kind of, what would we do if somebody said, I just want to live with people like me? I mean, what would the action of the commission be? And so, felt probably that one had less value possibly. So that one was the one that essentially I said, of all those, that's probably the one that we could afford to live without. So that one was removed. The other contact I had from Jen, I guess it was yesterday morning, was a suggested rewording of the question regarding to climate change and mitigation planning. And so Jen had contacted and expressed a concern that the question was somewhat compound and that there were 2 components of it. As you may recall, the wording was the City of Moscow should begin to study the potential local impacts of climate change and potential local mitigation actions. And so there were kind of 2 components of the question. And so she felt that asking a more simple single component question, because you don't know if somebody may believe we should begin to study, if not necessarily mitigation actions. And there was, I guess she expressed concern on the word of mitigation. She suggested alternate wording of the City of Moscow should consider the issue of climate change as it plans for the future, to simplify the question, and it looks like that's the question that they're going to go with. So just to make the Commission aware, there were a few tweaks to the questions that were submitted for the survey. think that's the only item I had.
Okay. And Joel is not here to give us a Transportation Commission report.
And I don't believe the Transportation Commission has met since the last meeting. They will be meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
And on the agenda, if you'll give me 2 seconds here, I will pull it up. The agenda tomorrow includes, for the commission, includes a report on the street lighting program, as well as downtown historic district signage update. So there were, those that recall the blue informational signs from the downtown area. I think Historic Preservation has looked at some of those were taken down. They were faded. I mean, you couldn't even read them any longer. So those were taken down last year. And Public Works has been working on some historic-style historic district information. I think the Historic Preservation Commission has reviewed those. So I think Les is going to provide an update on that signage and those. And then the last item is discussion of future agenda items for the commission.
Yeah, we should probably just say to the rest of the commission that isn't on, because I don't think we'd seen it here, but these new signs that Public Works is doing are really cool. They'll show that this historic downtown and name buildings, and it's really a nice, they're really doing some good work, and we without anybody asking to do it that I know, unless John asked them.
No.
But they're really interesting, and so we've been really much entertained, and I think you'll like them once they go up.
Just in addition to that, they have got some new equipment that is very amenable to making personalized signs. And so they've been using that and playing with it and coming up with different things so that I think it'll broaden the amount and the type of signs that we can use, and over time it will reduce the cost, because when you start ordering metal signs, it's very expensive. I know what those political signs cost, and they are not designed to last very long. The metal ones are designed to last quite a while, and they're really quite expensive. So I think he's got the guys working on it, and got some good communication. And if you've got an idea, if you're a member of the staff, or anyway, I think that's one of the reasons that they're coming up with some of that good stuff.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Maybe you'll have an open house to feature them when they all get up.
Well, yeah.
How about a first Thursday?
Well, that, but certainly when the time comes to have our commission fair too, we can really show that. That'd be something fun. I think people are going to enjoy seeing it.
The other just quick item was the City Council conducted a public hearing on the small fence code amendment that the Commission saw here not too long ago, and adopted that as recommended by the Commission.
Great.
That's on Monday night.
I have 2 other thoughts that I had. One was sort of under the transportation heading. I happened to drive Palouse River Drive today and was looking at the backside, if you will, of Indian Hills 6 Phase 2.
Yes.
And they appear to be bringing a road down, they appear to be bringing Blaine down the hill there, along what was sort of my faint memory of the proposed alignment, doing the earthwork to get that in place. Do you know if that's really going to get constructed all the way through?
It is not. Part of the public improvements includes a stormwater system that has to be extended down to the detention pond that will be located just north of Palouse River Drive, just on the east side of where that line extension would come down. In order to do that, they'll have set the manholes, and so they are rough grading what essentially the future grade of the roadway and setting those manholes in order to bring the stormwater down to that detention facility, but they will not be constructing Blaine beyond the intersection.
Okay.
So it looks like Blaine's being constructed because they are grading it at the grade so they can set those manholes at the proper elevation. But the roadway itself will not be constructed at this point in time.
So then they'll just farm around the manholes?
They may, yeah,
whatever they do.
they'll probably, I don't know, I'm sure they'll blend it in on the shoulders and they'll end up farming the majority of the site. And there have been sanitary manholes out there for 30 years in the old field because there were sanitary lines that came off Indian Hills Drive that came that way out in the field and then continued north to Blaine. And so that they've been farming over utilities in that area. So I'm assuming once they get the elevation set and get those in place, they'll probably bring it back a little bit and probably continue to farm that area.
The other is, I was on, I think it's college that goes from Jackson towards the university. And I saw at the Feral Gas property back there, there's been a lot of dirt dumped,
Yes.
as if somebody was raising the level of the land along in that area. And it seemed like that's about the roadway right-of-way.
It is. The university has been placing some material that has coming off the new sorority site just behind the sub. Apparently, that is property the university acquired. The city acquired an underground utility easement and roadway surface street easement across that property. They've had, I think, some issues with water ponding in that area, and so the intent was just, I think, for them was just as a maintenance issue in the intermediate time to try to fill in a little bit of that location.
All right, thank you. Any other correspondence or transportation sort of stuff? Then we'll move on to open microphone. This is a time when members of the public may speak to the commission regarding matters that are not on the agenda or currently pending before Planning and Zoning Commission. Please state your name and address for the record. Victoria.
They know I'm coming. Victoria Seaver, 121 North Lily, Moscow. So I didn't come last time. I don't want to come every time, but I watched you on TV, and lo and behold, there was a neighbor here, and I didn't know her, but I share her concerns. She was talking about the Wanderers Tavern, and I know that my first thought was also, sounds like a noise ordinance problem, maybe not so much P&Z, but I got to thinking about it, and I think it is P&Z. Or at least I have questions that go along with these codes. So I'm going to try and fire off some of my bullet points that I tried to give Bill a heads up on ahead of time. So you guys just went through the whole, we don't want to fence next to a sidewalk that's even 3 feet wide, and yet they're putting up a fence, or is that a wall? I don't know. That is 6 feet tall, right up against the sidewalk. You know where it is. It's on Third. It's right across from. It's right next to Archer's.
That's be the loosest definition of a fence I've ever seen.
Yeah, it also would be the loosest definition of a wall I've ever seen too.
Well, we thought
It would fall
some
down
of us thought it
immediately
was
if-
art.
If it was sitting on campus as art, yeah,
I think it's-
I'd get it. You know,
It's
it was art.
experimental construction.
Yeah,
is
it
what it
is.
looks like to me.
Yeah. So I walk by it all the time, and I just shake my head thinking, this isn't going to last, this isn't going to last, this isn't going to last, and it's still there. But I didn't realize I had a neighbor that was jumping on it, and I'm going to jump on it with her. So they have these, if I get the terms wrong, you can correct me because I'm not a construction person, but I think they're 4x4 posts that are just floating on top of the asphalt. They're not cemented in or anything. They got these little angle pieces that have got a screw in the asphalt and a screw in the post, and there's a couple of those. They had a ton of pallets, so I think they took the slats off of the pallets and nailed them across there. They got these big, so it's like an Oreo cookie with these big rocks in it, and they're heavy and bowing out, and then they have limbs across some of them. They're not even wood. It's not treated. It's not going to last if it would even last the weather, which they're falling down, so they're not lasting the weather. They sit in a pile of mess for weeks. Nobody touches them. There's somebody over there tonight. The lights are on. Can't see in, but the lights are on. It's the first time I've seen lights on. So they have this fence that just makes me cringe, and if there's ever any people there, especially at a bar, they're going to lean against it, they're going to tug on it, it looks like a ladder, they're going to climb on it, that thing's coming down and people are going to get hurt. And I also don't want to think what's going to happen with all those rocks. And so there's just no way I can see that fits any kind of a code for a wall or a fence, and I don't understand why it's there and why it continues. The brick columns look nice, but they're hollow, and one was only up a couple weeks before it got knocked over. It's still knocked over. You can see it. It looks like it's about a brick down in the. They just cut the asphalt a little bit and down in the ground, and so that's not going to hold up. I cannot believe or understand, and that's one of my questions. That you're telling me or you said to her, central business doesn't require parking. How is that possible? We have parking requirements everywhere, but not for business. Any business worth its salt is going to have customer parking, and they're taking their parking lot and turning it into an outdoor concert, which a little bird says, and I can't say if it's true or not, they're going to build a stage there for their concerts. That's what I hear from somebody, which I can't swear to. So you mentioned, well, we went ahead and said we can put mortuaries in our fort. Yeah, I was here for that. Put a mortuary next door. I'd be happy with that. Nice, quiet neighbors. No problem, you know. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with bar being next door to me if I was right next door. She's just down the street from it. I've lived on that street before I bought my house in 4 different apartments. I know that street. I've lived in 2 apartments the next street over, and the next street over is where my house is. I'm only a couple of blocks away as the crow flies. I heard one of those concerts at night. I didn't call the police because I thought, oh, well, that's not going to last. And I can't believe the police didn't act on it. You know, but noise is the least of the issues. There's tons of safety problems. You're spending money to beautify the entries, and we have that mess sitting right there, 2 blocks off of the main intersection of town. You know, I don't get it. You know, maybe it's going to be beautiful someday, but where are the signs that suggest that it will be? Because it certainly doesn't look like it. You want R4 to work? That's not the way to do it. The Perch couldn't have its liquor license automatically, which we just went through this summer, because it's next to both church and school. So I want to know how close you can get bars, because we got parks over there. Otten's Park's only a couple blocks away. Better not be hurting my park. I fought for that park. You know, Gormley Park is not very far away. West Park's not very far away. The Islamic Center's not very far away. How close did you put bars to things like that? You know, I mean, it's just not appropriate. What else have I got on here? We have all kinds of fender benders during the day that are happening on I read the public records that happen on 6th and 3rd and Almond and Asbury and Jackson and sometimes Lilly and sometimes further west. And this is at night on a one-way street in the dark after people have been drinking. And they had a concert and there was no bathrooms. Do you want to guess what they were doing? You know, if I was Archer's photography, I'd be having a heart attack because they're going to use his parking lot. They're going to use that plaza parking lot. And then they're going to get all the trash and the broken bottles and everything else. This is not what you do in a neighborhood. So where are the codes? What are the codes? Not here just to annoy people. They're here to protect us. And I want to see some protection here, and I want to know what's going on with these codes and how this happens. I know motor business is right behind it, and R4 is right behind that. There are kids in the neighborhood. So I think there's some problems here, and I'd like some clarification, and I'd like to know, you know, if we missed something and we need to work on something, then let's do it. So anyway, that's what I'm bringing up. And you're forewarned, so
Yep.
you can have some answers.
I'll try to respond to a few of those. I think as I mentioned before, there are no building permits required for fences under 6 feet in height, so there are no structural standards.
It's not 6 feet because it's taller than I am.
Over 6 feet in height. So up to 6 feet, no building permit is required. Any fence that is over 6 feet does require a building permit. There are zoning standards for placements and heights and how, you know, we just went through the whole discussion, but nothing in the zoning code speaks to the construction materials or stability of the fence. Nor does it address a site that is under construction with materials spread out. The city attorney has walked down, has visually inspected it with the chief of police. They don't feel that it constitutes a public nuisance, and that would be the other kind of mechanism of the city code that the city could utilize, was to declare something a public nuisance. Based upon the city attorney's determination, he did not feel that it met that standard.
What does it take to have that standard met?
Imminent risk to the public. Anything that happens on the private property itself, to some degree, is the property owner's liability. But there are some, and certainly I can refer you to city attorney to talk about that, but that was one of the options that the city has to potentially address a situation like that, but he did not feel that it met that standard. There has been no off-street parking in Central Business District for 30 years.
Yeah, why isn't there?
It's to try to encourage the maximum development of the property, to encourage continuous street frontage and pedestrian scale development without the intrusion of large parking lots that break it up, like you see out in the motor business district.
So it's a shared system.
It is. It's
Yeah, in
there's
downtown, it's a shared system. Yeah.
There is publicly provided parking. Granted, this is at the far extent of the central business district.
Right at the
It's
edge.
not as close to that public parking, but it is intended to provide a pedestrian-focused environment where you can have continuous building walls and street fronts without the interruptions of large parking lots. And that's how the central business district functions. The mortuary was kind of the neighborhood business district discussion, and mortuaries were allowed in the central business
Yeah.
district, but bars are too. Bars are allowed in the CB district. And eating and drinking establishments is essentially how they're termed in the code, and they're allowed in the CV, and that's probably our greatest concentration of eating and drinking establishments are in the central business district. As far as separation, there is a provision, if you're going to get a beer or wine license or a liquor license for on-premise consumption, that it has to be located at least 300 feet away from churches or elementary schools, unless the council issues a waiver. And the council can issue a waiver, and then the license can be issued, and that was the discussion with the perch.
And this is more than 300 feet.
And this is more than 300 feet, and parks are not considered in that state statute. I'm aware there were the two events. We only after the fact, so I don't have really details about what's happened. Nothing else has happened since that time. I do believe that anytime you have amplified music outside, you have to get a variance from the police department from the noise ordinance. And when complaints are received, then those are no longer issued in the future. So I doubt that there's going to be any other future outdoor activities. The police department has indicated that they're not inclined to issue any additional variances for outdoor amplified music at that location. So it may be that
They may have already
they
done
may
themselves
have-
in on that
they
one.
may- Well, I'm just
Well,
saying
you don't
there
wanna
may
say
not
that.
need to be any more issued on the property. I don't know anything about a stage. They've not come in to us to give us any
Like I said,
any detailed discussion.
That was someone who talked to them during the summer, and that's what they were told.
I
don't know.
I don't
Hearsay.
know. They have not presented any type of plan at this point in time. There is no certificate of occupancy for the building. There have been general discussions about wanting to open a bar, a nightclub there. There are building code requirements, including fire suppression systems, that have to be installed before that can occur. And I understand they're working in that direction, but we've not seen any building plans at this time. And then the noise, is the city's noise ordinance. That is what's been defined as acceptable levels of noise in the community, and that's up to the police department to administer and enforce. I guess those are the main ones that I guess I'd respond to. If there's any other
I know,
questions,
'cause-
to answer.
Okay, those were pretty much the bullet points.
Yeah.
It seems to me that the planning and zoning question here, which I think we touched on last time, is just how do we think through the potential collisions of the abutments of zones? And you look at 3rd Street and you say, well, it ought to have some kind of a commercial character, given it connects downtown to the Miracle Mile out there. You're going to, something commercial wants to happen along it. Right. So then you've got a couple of choices. Central business, general business, motor business. Maybe you decide neighborhood business, but that really would be to say, let's have things like the Terragraphics house and the old micro, just kind of keeping the house character there, which may or may not be the long-range desired direction. So, but anything other than neighborhood business, you could potentially get an eating and drinking establishment. So now it comes down to the question of, do we not want eating and drinking establishments abutting residential areas? Or is it really not a zoning issue, but a management and behavior issue that at the planning level you say, well, that seems like it could work. And then the question is, how good are the neighbors when they are there? Do they behave in ways that were imagined could work, as opposed to were imagined could never possibly work.
So, yeah, I mean, there's shades of gray here. So, I mean, like Gambino's is drinking and eating on 6th Street, and I don't see a problem with
And
that.
it must abut an R4 neighborhood
Yeah,
behind.
you know, but you don't have outrageous music going on at Outlet, which maybe never will happen again, but, you know.
It's all
I don't know.
inside.
You know, I don't know.
And then, there's the other.
We're not getting a real good feel from the people that are there, from just what we see, and from what some people have heard. So, and you may be right. You know, part of it's a behavior issue, but
Folks have talked to some of the folks there.
there are some folks that have talked to some of the folks there. I haven't talked to anybody there. I just
Yeah, so then, I guess it's a question of how do you figure out how to lay out a plan, and then as it unfolds in ways that are satisfactory. I mean, sometimes it unfolds with wrinkles in it.
and I say, here's a wrinkle.
I think I can tell you for sure that as long as what is on the north end of town as you come in on the right is allowed to stay there,
Oh, yeah.
what's going on down there is going to be allowed to stay there. I do not want to be part of the political process where we say, you got to clean your stuff up, but you don't, which is exactly what would happen if we were to tell them, or if we were to bring to the council a change in our rules for one particular business.
Yeah, I understand. But the fence thing drives me crazy. I see people getting hurt. In my mind's eye, that's what I see is going to happen.
That they have to have insurance.
And
that's
I don't want to see people get hurt.
Well,
I see
that's-
those rocks coming down on top of somebody.
I
and
would agree. I
somebody's
think-
going to get hurt.
I drive by it myself, and I look at it and say, I have no idea what they're doing there, but at this point, they've got every right to do it because they haven't done anything that runs afoul of any of the city codes that manage that piece of property. Bill said that they probably screwed the pooch when they had their music, and that comes from the police department. And if the police department didn't like it, they just simply won't.
Okay.
Now, I'm not, I have no idea what the police department's going to do.
Right.
But, I mean, that particular building was a church. It was a
right.
Kentucky
Okay.
Fried Chicken. It was a bar. Oh, yeah, it was a bar.
I don't think I know.
You haven't been in town long enough.
Was it co-op?
The co-op was
There was a
there.
co-op was there
Co-op
too.
was there, and also
I remember it was a church.
the university used it for
Anthropology lab.
its archaeology
Yeah.
department when they were,
Bowers lab.
I don't know what you do when you bring
an
back all of the stuff from the dig.
institution.
What's that?
It was an educational
It's
institution.
been a mixed-use building.
Yeah.
All right, so I think what we're seeing is that sort of, where does the planning pieces end
Right.
up, and where
And
does
that's-
then the execution end
I
up?
just want to kind
And
of bring that up, so we have that little piece of knowledge in our background, or I do, or something, It's not like we don't put up with noise all the time anyway, but there's a limit. But the fence, I just cringe on that fence. I'm just waiting for someone to get hurt.
Victoria, turn your head when you go
I do.
by.
I do. Turn my head and just keep
watch the
walking.
yellow line.
Look out
would
into the street.
Like I said, my first thought wasn't that this was a place to come, and then I thought, well, it's codes and stuff, maybe it is, but I'd feel remiss if I didn't say something, so I'm saying something, and I appreciate your comment.
Thank you.
Keep it in mind.
It seemed like it's appropriately zoned, and there's going to have to always be something that's on the edge. And there's going to be some friction at times on the edge, but it seems like most of the problems there are behavioral problems that the noise ordinance should be addressing rather than zoning. We can't really, I mean, you can, in our one neighborhood, you could have somebody having a party with amplified music till late. So I don't really think that has to do with the zoning. That has to do with the behavior of the people that occupy the space. So hopefully that's what will come into play, is that if they're doing something there that is outside the code, that it'll get enforced.
Okay. I've been waiting all summer for something to happen.
But it seemed like the noise issue was what brought this to the surface, and it's been not a chronic thing, but an occasional thing. And probably it's going to go away of its own volition, because it won't be economically feasible to do it.
Well, they closed up. They were right across the street here.
I was totally unaware of them when they were across the street.
Yeah, right. Directly, you.
Somebody told me that, but I wasn't.
Yeah, you walk out down the steps, you go across the street, and you could have walked right into the Wanderer's Tavern. And it never
Didn't have.
did
It didn't
enough.
have fence though, did it?
Didn't do anything else.
Never did enough
big rock
business across the street here to have an impact on anybody. I was still in the beer business, and they only had a beer and wine license. And they didn't sell a lot of beer.
See, it's your fault because you talked about fences, and so you made me so aware of fences that I just don't know what to do with this thing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Looking at the agenda, this feels like an error on my part. I see that number 6 is the shared readings discussion, and number 7 is the review of the proposed amendment. I would propose that we take them in the opposite order. Deal with our real business first, and propose amendment, and then come back to the reading.
Well, item 7 will not take very long, so that's just fine.
Is there more than one there?
This is not a final draft. I asked Mike to work with Rod to look at it and amend it to the code. And this is in follow-up to the North Main discussion and the possible reduction of front or street side setbacks in the motor business district to allow for buildings to be placed up closer to the street than the required 10-foot front setback that currently exists in the motor business district. We talked about, at that point in time, allowing that through conditional use. What Mike and Rod worked up here certainly would do that. All it does is insert a new conditional use. That's really all there is in the ordinance, is just that one underlined section, which under the CUP is number 4, would be structures less than 10 feet from front or street side property line. And then on item number H, where it specifies the setback, it would be, they're stated as 10 and 10 for front and street side, and then just add except as otherwise allowed by this code. And what I would like to do under number 4 on the front page is actually provide a little bit more guidance under what circumstances or conditions it would be appropriate and things to consider when reviewing that as a conditionally permitted use, so that it's not just simply an opportunity to ask for that deviation without any real criteria for the board that may be looking or considering a conditional use permit to allow for the reduction of setback to really think about, where it's consistent with the surrounding neighborhood or the city's comprehensive plan, or appropriate for the site in consideration of surrounding land uses and transportation systems. So I'd like to add just a little bit of guidance to that section, but this would allow, just on its face, would allow the reduction of those setbacks through a conditional use permit. But I would like to provide just a little bit of kind of guidance about what we're really trying to achieve there and where it's consistent with surrounding development or historical development patterns in the area. Just to provide a little bit better guidance of the application of that. But other than that, it doesn't take much to insert that as a reduction to the conditional use permit in the motor business district. So this was the first draft, and be happy to hear any comments that the commission may have.
And I had clarified, as this was coming forward, that the staff had made the decision to separate this from the other conversation that we've had again, stemming out of North Main, which was residential above and behind. It was just
Correct.
thought to bring these forward as two separate pieces. So in case you were looking for where's all that gone.
Yeah, the residential ordinance we actually reviewed the last meeting and is scheduled for hearing at our next meeting on the 22nd. The change to the residential allowances in the commercial zoning district. So that's on its way through the hearing process.
So then my thought, Bill, is I'm remembering back 2, maybe 3 years, there was a visitor came to the U of I, presented an evening lecture and maybe a workshop. And the idea, his examples were from New England.
Oh, that was Randall Arendt.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Okay. Randall
Arendt.
Was bringing, fighting having deep setbacks and bringing things to have, instead of maximum setbacks rather than minimums. What feels like this is the start, because my first thought when you were saying we wanted to add some clarifications, I thought, do we really want Tri-State to pull all the way? It was a question of scale was the clarification. I mean, I could see some of the little businesses along North Main. Han has got a piece that they pulled forward. There's a couple that are already there. But they're relatively small scale, like the Main Street.
I think it's
There's
more
central
a
business.
matter of how close entrance and, I mean, if you're going to put a blank wall 10 feet from the sidewalk, if a business is putting their entrance on the side or some other location, I agree that that would be oppressive, no matter, but I don't think it's a matter of the scale of the building. I think it's a matter of the permeability of the building, whether you can see into it, and also where the entrances are located. So I think somehow that depth almost needs to be accompanied with this, that you can come closer to the property line or the reduce the setback if there is that permeability in some way. And that, Randall talks a lot about that issue, so that you don't have, just a big garage door or something and not something that's accessible to pedestrians, because it's really to try to support pedestrianism that you would want to do this in the first place. And so if you try to support pedestrianism but then just have blank walls along in that 10-foot zone, it's not doing anything for anybody. So I think
I'm adding a comma at the end of this and saying where the facade and fenestration supports
right, where
pedestrian
certain
street
design
life,
standards
yeah.
are met in terms of percentage of openings or something like that. I don't know how you would do it, but along those lines.
But that's the trade-off that the goal we're seeking is street life.
Right.
And you want to come forward, the trade-off is
You're not going to
engage
get it
street
with
life.
blank walls on, along the street. So.
Other thoughts about, and so Wendy, you're arguing it'd be fine if Tri-State came up to
I would, because they have several entrances, and if they had a few more windows, it would be nice. But basically, yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that myself.
Okay. And even if they didn't have windows, if they did other things to the facade that were encouraging of being there, maybe there's some awnings, maybe that encourage pedestrian life is what the point would be. But maybe you're saying no, they need to have.
I think they need to have some
50%
entrances
of
that are pedestrian
windows
oriented to do that, among other things. I mean,
It's a hard thing to think that. I mean, there are big boxes in downtowns that we don't think about as boxes because they're permeable.
Yeah.
And so if you go, I'm going to just say as an example, in a small town, Walla Walla has a Macy's. It goes at least one block, maybe more. Maybe it's a block and a half. And it's wonderful. I mean, you can look in the window and see dresses, see hair, see everything you wanted to see in a store. And there's an entry every 50 feet or so to get into the building. And so, yeah, I think Wendy's she's right on line.
Well,
That's
because
what we want.
What it would do, if you brought something like Tri-State up to they're not going to do it, but
Well,
probably.
right.
But if a new Tri-State was going to be built, if they brought it 10 feet from the property line, then where does their parking go? It goes on the side or in the back. So then the building becomes dominant rather than the parking lot. And that starts to close in the corridor, make it, what we like, what everybody loves about Main Street is the fact that the street wall to street wall is pretty tight. You have this closure that you can't get when you have 400-foot setbacks of parking lot and then the building back behind. So the more we can encourage large boxes to get their buildings out front and their parking on the side or the back, I think ultimately that will start to transform the problems that we see along the strip.
Okay, so while we're on the
Yeah.
strip there, come this way a little bit and move Jack in the Box forward. Is that where you're going to have a much smaller building,
Yeah.
The sort of fast food restaurant sized building? Move it way forward, but there's still going to be drive on
Right,
both
right.
sides and stuff like that. Is that still going to work?
I'd have to look at that one and think about
Okay.
it, because I'm not getting
It's not.
yeah.
It's got a different feel because those types of structures are surrounded because
Right,
you've got
there are islands
you got
and
vehicle
circulation all around them.
and so it's a different type of design. An example of a recent project that's right about the 10-foot mark is the AutoZone building. It's up front with landscaping and the parking's to the side of the building, and it's at about, I think it's right at that 12 to 13 feet from property line.
Which building?
AutoZone.
Okay.
That new auto place,
Okay. New auto
nicely
place.
orange painted or
Road,
something.
ground
I mean, that's one of the few kind of in the area where it is up close and parking was to the side, relatively close, not within 10 feet, but if I recall correctly, I didn't review that one, but it was in that 11, 12 feet from the property line, which is, that area is now landscaping, then the building wall and the parking is to the east of the
Yeah, I think you have
store.
to say associated pedestrian, what's the word for the things that we, in other words, when we did our big box thing, we began to talk about it, but we've watched it all over the country, but even at our own mall. When that mall was built, it was just a big wall. And now we've got all kinds of things whacking into it. TNT is whacked into it. Starbucks whacked into it. Most of these companies want a little more freedom than the mall often gives them. And so now there's, I presume that there still may be more doors cut into the mall, and so it certainly makes that front of the mall look entirely different than it did 25 years ago. And that's what we're looking for here, is those.
And there you run a situation, so if you're familiar with the sidewalk that's located beyond the buffer strip on the edge of the parking lot, that's essentially property line out there, because the right-of-way is fairly wide. And so building up to the property line there is not going to have, up to that sidewalk is not going to have any real significant impact on the rotary corridor itself.
At the mall.
Yeah,
Right,
at
because
the
it's
mall.
so, right. there's a big
Because
zone.
the scale's so large and because the
Right.
right-of-way is so large. And you got
Well,
land.
sure. I'm thinking about
Yeah.
walls.
Right, the experience of that
It's
wall
just that,
has changed.
but that's changed in our immediate lifetime. In 20 years, we
But
didn't
I
have.
even think of the urban core of Boise, and is it the convention center or something? It's not the convention center, but it's right near the couplet and near Capitol Boulevard. You walk a whole city block with just a big blank wall.
Yeah,
You know
it's
what I'm talking
really
about?
bad.
It's pretty oppressive, and it's right up there.
That was a
Because
great
there's
hotel.
no entrances on
Right.
that, or windows on that whole wall.
No, it was
so-
an ugly thing that
Yeah.
happened, and
Yeah.
what it did was force people. There was never any thought that people were going to walk along
Right.
Front Street.
And it turns out people want to walk along Front
Absolutely.
Street because they're coming from hotels.
Yeah.
So thinking about a percentage of openings, maybe, as part of the ability to move forward into the
And might
Yeah.
there be other amenities? So
Right.
percentage of
right,
openings,
right,
which might be doors or windows.
right.
Are you suggesting awnings or other three-dimensionality that?
Well, those are nice, but we don't really require them on.
Well, and I guess what I
Of course, they're 10 feet back, so they might.
Yeah.
one thing to consider is 10 feet is here to the middle of the third table.
Mhm.
It's not very far.
Right.
If they have to do
Awnings. Yeah.
awnings, windows, all these design elements to gain that, when the natural tendency in that market, and we're talking out on the highway
Right.
corridors, is to put parking lot in front and the building in the back because they want, it's motorist, it's motor business, and they want the motorists to see the steering wheel to the driveway to the parking stall to the entry. Placing requirements in order to gain the 10 feet, are we going to see people take advantage of that? I guess my question is, we're all talking about kind of downtown environments, and I know we'd like to replicate that out on the corridors, but, I guess we should be thinking of incentives for that to occur, hopefully with the product that you want at the end of the day, too.
Mm-hmm.
But, if it's, you can gain that 10, we want to allow, really, this conversation started at North Main and allowing Han, when it built down, to rebuild that.
Right.
That's one small portion of the motor business throughout the city, and I guess we just need to be careful about thinking we're going to give this great 10 feet when they're talking about lots that are 300 feet deep, and that's not.
As much of an issue. Yeah, I was thinking about a town where this is successful. Ironically, to me, their best planning decision is Leavenworth, and it's not all their Bavarian stuff that they plastered onto the buildings, but along the highway, Highway 2 plows right through part of the edge of the town there. They have this. I don't know if it's 10 feet or 15 feet, but they have a restricted setback. You can't go retreat farther than that, and they require parking on their big buildings on the side or in the back. And it has this impact of closing in that corridor, and and there's hundreds of pedestrians going up and down the sidewalks, in this highway corridor because they have something other than huge parking lots on either side. And it's really interesting to look how they closed in that street corridor from building face to building face by doing that. And it might be a long-term goal where things kind of gradually shift that way. It's not going to happen. It may take a long time for that to happen.
So we have the condition in kind of two different places. We have, of course, the highway, the big highway, the Miracle Mile is a little bit different. But if we think of Jackson and or Washington, and we think of the buildings, their Follett's, and the buildings along there have glass fronts. Across the street there's some. So we see pretty rapid travel on Washington with its 3 lanes, but it's at least approximating an urban condition. The co-op isn't as wonderful on the Washington side but then it was a historic building. It was already there a long time before we even kind of rebooted our thought process. But I just am thinking there are a lot of different conditions that we see. In some cases out on the highway, it doesn't seem to make much sense.
Well, and those areas are central business, the co-op
Right.
and Follett's.
But think of all the student traffic, pedestrian traffic that goes across that whole corridor from the mall and where they're living up on A Street, et cetera, to campus. I mean, it's not a friendly pedestrian zone, but it's a heavy pedestrian zone. So how can we make it better?
Yeah, and I guess I'm not saying all of these things, but you were trying to give the Board of Adjustment ideas that would be the basis for making those decisions.
Under what conditions is it appropriate? And where we will run into this more often is not out on the highway corridors, because that's where the lots deepen. Where you're going to run into it is the transition from Wanderers goes into motor business out third until you get to the old Kavanaugh's, Jack in the Box, and then it deepens out into the larger commercial lotting patterns. So it'll be the corridor there from Alden to Llewellyn. It'll be the corridor from A Street to Rosars to E.
Yeah.
Those are really the two segments we're largely talking about. There may be others that come in the future. Highway 8, we have maybe a few instances of
Or the barbecue joints.
CDs kind of being the one that stands out. Maybe a few older buildings that may be close. And then north, you really don't have much once you get over the North Main Hill. And once you get out to the Pullman Highway, 10 feet on a corridor like that is not a significant distance. I mean, so the areas that we're really talking about trying to facilitate flexibility, in my not that we don't want to see infill or buildings coming close to the street, but where I think the 10 feet will make a difference is Almond to Llewellyn and A to E. And those are pretty much really the two locations. And the reason why is that's how it was developed. I mean, the buildings are at the property line, so where Cowgirls Chocolates are, and those buildings are built to property line, and that was probably as the road grew, they came closer to them. But those are the two areas where the existing character is in that fashion, and we want to allow where that existing character is established. We want to allow them to expand or rebuild or redevelop or strengthen that. I don't think given 10 feet on a 600-foot deep lot out on the large commercial lot, it's not going to mean anything. And so, I mean, for a project like that, it's just not going to be something that makes or breaks a site. It's going to be on a small lot, on these shallow lots, on these two corridors. So I really think we're talking where this could be beneficial, or is in these two locations, just north of Main and just west of downtown. And what really drives that is the existing character is already in that, and we just want to allow it to rebuild, to intensify, to expand in that condition. And so,
But do you want to set up the opportunity as lots get redeveloped over time to continue those patterns?
yeah,
So I think you wouldn't want to
we're not precluding.
exclude
Right.
them.
Not precluding, and that's why this
Yeah.
would apply everywhere. But
Yeah.
the greatest, so where the patterns, existing developed patterns, consistent with the existing developed character of the area, or where the public benefits of the project warrant the allowance. And those public benefits are maybe those pedestrian amenities, maybe it provides an opportunity for an innovative redevelopment of the site. Maybe it's Rosars decides that there's two nice building pads up front, and if they could be at least, if they can come in within 5 feet of the walk, it makes the parking lot layout work, and we get a building up at the street wall. Those are the kind of situations that I think are more likely to occur. Number one, expansion, intensification, redevelopment of lots that are in these two locations, or outpad development on sites that have large parking that decide that there's a higher and better use of that asphalt area to be able to put a building out there. And providing some flexibility to encourage that activity, I think, would be good.
Right. Okay.
So I would just like to provide a little bit of
guidance.
language that gives some guidance in along those directions, and certainly doesn't preclude it. And we can talk about, rather than possibly mandating requirements, speak to the public where it provides public benefit, and we can talk maybe what some of those might be, and then it's in a more positive tone than if you want to get there, you have to do all these things. I would just like to, because it won't mean as much out there. It'll mean more where it's a little tight.
Okay. So we managed to make that into a long item.
I'm sorry. One sentence.
So, do you want to vote as to our direction that you bring this, take the spirit of this conversation and bring this forward, or do you just want direction?
If there's general agreement with that concept, then we'll work on refined language and we'll come back next time.
Sounds good.
Good. Sure.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. So now, back to number 6, shared readings discussion. There were 3 articles. The first one, for our friends at home who may not have read all of that, is actually, the Reader's Digest version is right here in many respects inside of the Water Matters, which arrived fairly recently. Oh, and here's the last chance to plug before it happens, I guess. Thursday, October 16 is the Water Summit, 4:30 in the afternoon out at the Best Western. Anyway, so the first one is regarding what Post Basin Aquifer Committee work, what we know about the aquifer. And then the second one, I emailed Bill. I went bug-eyed trying to read through some of the stuff there, which was the surface water capture strategies.
Yeah.
And it explores over the same methodology repeated, up here on Hatters Creek and over here on the North Fork of the Palouse and down at Olawi and the Snake and up
I
at
lost
Gorjak
where I was in the
Dam.
drainage a few times. To put it mildly.
And then the third one was about reuse of treated sewage water. What I found interesting in the second one, appreciated very much, was about page 12, 13, somewhere in there, was a attempt to extrapolate from a study that had been done up on the Rathdrum Prairie, the impacts of climate change as they might impact water supply. And the most notable thing there were some different changes in timing of rainfall and changes from snowfall to rainfall, but was observations about the amount of evaporation that might be expected.
Accelerated it.
Right.
Even with an urban heat island effect, you get that too. I mean, the more concrete you have, the more
warmer it is,
yeah,
the more
exactly.
evaporation.
I mean, and so some cities are even planning specifically for urban heat island effects because of their accelerated evaporation.
Right. So then, following through in each of the pieces of study, it tended to be a column of, and this would be with the consideration of the enhanced evaporation caused by climate change. So I was very appreciative to see that in that document, which is from last fall, or at least the workshop was dated last fall, there was some attention to that whole question. The piece that I couldn't puzzle out there was there were, a dozen, maybe more, different places to go get surface water. And they all came with price tags, and they all came with sort of anticipated volume of water that you would get. And some of them were anticipated to be regional level. I mean, they meet Pullman and Moscow's needs both, and some of them were definitely smaller. But what I couldn't get my head around was that a lot of money or a little money? How does the money for those projects compare to the money that we currently spend as capital expenditures or something? Can we talk about doing these or not? It's sort of where I couldn't puzzle out from the information that was in that reading.
Well, I don't think, for one thing, a little town like ours that is essentially a little residential community can't afford much. We couldn't afford, I presume, I think John can help us out, we can't afford a sewage treatment plant without block grants or some kind of granting. It's hard.
It's a challenge. We've actually funded all of ours without grant funds so
We have
far.
without.
Yes. We have done revenue bonds, and we have received low-interest loans, but I don't know that we've received any significant grant fund sources.
I see.
The potlatches the Genesees and Troys, the smaller towns of the world are the ones that tend to be the CDBG recipients on water
Harder
facilities.
time.
They may not have kept up on rate studies. They may not have a capital improvement program. They may not have putting money away for that. When you get to a community of our scale and size, we've been managing that aspect of it. So most of those are all funded through revenue bonds that are passed on to the ratepayers. And
Well, that's good. That's good.
Well, keeping in mind that those monies were spent because the EPA said you have to spend the money.
Certainly.
And at a certain point, when I was on the council the first time, we ended up, as a city, paying $130-some thousand fine to the EPA because we had not been moving at all on the situation. And the EPA, they're nobody's fool. They said, well, we'll get you off the dime. We're going to charge you $130-some thousand because you haven't done it. Mm-hmm. So the money that we're putting in has not been money that the community said we have to do this of our own volition. It has been said because the EPA said you're going to do this.
And John, you're referring to the sewage.
Sewage, water treatment, any of that.
All of that.
Yeah,
right.
It's that comes not because we decided it was a good thing, and as a city or as a town, that happened because the EPA said you're going to do it, and so we did.
And so I don't know when. I mean, the big thing on my mind is that surface water thing. When do we do like many of the big cities have done? I mean, San Francisco and Boston and New York are the big, vastly important cities that have, at some point in their life, gone out
and secured remote water.
Begged, borrowed, and stolen land to make a place so that we could collect water. And if we were going to do something like that, it would take great leadership to start putting money away so that in 30 years we would have a pile of money that would be, because I think it's going to be enough money to scare us all.
If I might, so Nils had asked me to try to see what I could do to put it in the context of existing rates and revenues that are generated and what revenues may need to be generated. And these are just very rough numbers. So there's an aspect of any type of facility like this that ends up getting selected, or if it's chosen as the solution, there's an operational cost that's going to come along with it, above and beyond just the construction cost. But just in general, the projects ranged from $150 million to just over $1 million. Most of those that would produce any significant quantities were kind of in that range, from $25 million to $150 million. And so I just kind of looked up what the current interest rates are on government bonds, which right now are running on a 30-year bond at a 3% rate. So if you were to take the $25 million project on a 30-year bond at a 3% interest rate, and I'm not considering cost of issuance or any of the operational costs of the facility, your annual debt service is about $1.26 million per year over a 30-year term at a 3% rate. Right now, and I haven't just pulled up the budget for 2015, total revenues for fees for service, and that includes water, residential base rate, residential consumption, commercial base rate, a little bit of meter installation, only about $70,000. The annual revenue budget for 2015 is $4.3 million, $4.37 million in water.
And what did you say that fee was? Say it again.
$4.37 million.
Yeah, but
annually
before
revenues.
you said.
So the debt service is $1.26 million. So you're talking a 29% increase in revenues coming in to pay that debt service. Mm-hmm. Now, what class of user pays what, or what their increase? I'm just on the aggregate. If we say These monies are necessary for the operations of the facility, for the $500,000 of capital we install every year annually in the water system. If we need to generate new revenue based solely on rates, if that's the question, the new revenue for debt service for a $25 million bond at 3% over 30 years would be $1.25 million. And currently, our revenues for service are $4.3 million. So it's a 30% increase in water rates to fund your $25 million project. You can scale these up, so a $50 million project, $2.53 million annual debt service, 58.8% increase in rates. The $100 million project, so that's a 60% increase in water rates. The $100 million project, again, just doubling it up, $5.06 million, 117% rate increase, and the $150 million project, $7.59 million debt service annually. That's about 176.5% rate increase. So it kind of gives you that range of, if you were going to, now a project of that scale and nature, it's likely to include a combination of some form of grant funds, some earmark, as well as some local money to make a project like that happen. And so it's unlikely, if the city got to the point that it was going to embark on one of these projects, that we would be the sole funder. And some of these are regional solutions, so it could be partnership with Pullman to help distribute that cost. There could be contributions from the University of Idaho, although they are a ratepayer, essentially being included in those revenues. But it kind of gives you, I guess, if you just compare against revenues we'll collect in a day, kind of gives you a sense of if we were to finance that over a 30-year term at a municipal bond rate, that's the debt service, and that's the annual revenue that would need to be generated to pay that debt service.
So thank you very much for that, because
Yeah,
that helps me think. The 30% increase would be painful, but a council might be able to think about it. The 100% increase would not be a starter. So some of these ideas might be able to, especially with some work in advance to get ready for it, you might get to the cheap end of the spectrum that we would decide we could afford it. It's hard to think we would get to the high end of the spectrum and decide unless some player from the outside came in.
And when you,
but, the $150
the
million
things you do with the city funds, is the university in any way related to that? Probably not, huh?
Well, I should take that back, because I said the university was in here as a payer. Not in water. The university has its own water system, its own production system.
But they're going to run out of water just like we are.
They are. So they may be new revenue, new money to the table. We do obviously treat all their wastewater. And so there's a substantial, on the sewer fund, not the water fund, but on the sewer fund, there's a substantial component of the university paying for water treatment services. So yeah, I mean, the university is a partner, a large partner in the community. That would be new money here. It's not a rate increase on top of what they're paying. It'd be new money. Ultimately, there's, yes.
I assume that no other university in the state has the same problem that we do. I mean, Boise State's down in the river bottom, and they're digging up water at
and it's United Water down there. It's not even the city. It's United Water that does the water.
Right. But I'm just saying how they get water. Lewiston's down in the water zone, and I don't know about Idaho State. I don't know at Pocatello. I don't know what their water situation is, but.
Well, it seems like from reading one of the articles that some of the more affordable approaches are obviously regional solutions, and one of them talked about WSU and Pullman being able to access, I guess, a draw from somewhere much more affordably than we could, but then we would backfill to help cover their expenses because they wouldn't be drawing out of the Grand Ronde or one of the other wells. I don't remember. Like I said, I got lost in the drainage systems, but basically the concepts make sense.
Aqua deepens to the west, and so they'll have a longer duration to be able to draw upon groundwater resources that are much more cost effective.
Because it's lower elevation,
it's going like this.
But it's also the piping they talked about.
Oh, coming from Malawi.
It was less.
Pullman first.
Right.
Yeah. So the $25 million option that you. Is there a supply side number on that? How much additional water does $25 million how many additional gallons of availability does that buy you?
If you were to look at some of the options that are in that ballpark, and I just took those as just kind of incremental numbers, the numbers are all over the board, but there is a $25 million project from the South Fork of the Palouse River, direct reuse, that had an annual yield of 228 million gallons, and the city is producing about 880 million gallons right now. And so you're talking about a quarter of our annual use currently at that amount.
And that would require a 30% rate increase.
Correct.
Seems fairly reasonable. You can
To get a quarter.
Yeah, it costs you 25 or 30% more to get 25%.
Now, there's some others. For example, the North Fork of this river, that was a $40 million project. So not much more than the 25, and actually produced 1,550. So not nearly twice, but 1/3 of what we're currently producing. And there's a combination of what we produce. 30% is coming from the shallow. I'm using very round numbers, but 30% from the shallow, 70% from the deep system. The shallow system does have some recharge capabilities, so there's a way to possibly manage that along with the surface water to be able to continue to have groundwater that would also continue to supplement. But those are some ranges of a few. And the $150 million project from Dorshak was 7,270 million gallons per year, so nearly 10 times what we're currently, 8 times probably what we're currently producing.
Just like the total Palouse thing, it seems like the number was 2.4 billion gallons or something that we pumped. Moscow, Pullman, and the two universities together, wasn't it?
Yep, that'd be all right.
So the Dvorak one is more water. I mean, we're thinking about growth here over time.
It's a long term, yeah.
But that's a very long-term solution. The South Fork of the Palouse is a solution for some number of years, but we're going to outgrow it as well, in all probability. So then the thing that I also was unclear about in that second article was what they meant by aggressive water conservation strategies.
I'm not
The untapped, well, yeah, good question.
And to what extent are those low-flow toilets, and to what extent are those something else that is actually becomes a land use planning, our set of concerns, as opposed to...
Well, I was trying to figure out how this related to us directly, and I don't know if I can figure out anything exactly directly, other than a lot of jurisdictions have become more lenient on the reuse of gray water, and we pretty much prohibit it, right? Still? No?
We don't.
No, it just has to be discharged below grade.
So if you were to recapture your washing machine's water and use it for irrigation, you could do that now, because you couldn't do that.
Yeah, you can do that. It just has to be like a shallow septic drain field, essentially, so that it's not within an area of human contact.
I was been reading that book about water that is available before the Water Summit, and I may not, I'm going out on a limb here, but I think your question was asked and it was answered, I believe, in Las Vegas, because they're all over the board on water, but they are actively trying to deal with it. And they figure that by using aggressive conservation, they are able to reduce the use of water by about 10%. Because the amount of water that people use, households and stuff, are considerably larger. And I mean, like at Bellagio, that's all recycled water. And they figure that a person uses 100 gallons per day. And if you cut that down, you're still only, when it's all said and done, you're saving about 10% of the water that is being used by aggressive conservation. Helps, but does not solve the problem.
So I was wondering, from a planning standpoint, we have ideas of stormwater management. That is, if you create so much, over a certain amount of impervious surface, then you have to do something to manage the runoff. Might we also think about some other requirements? If you create more than so much roof, you have to catch the rainwater off of it, or that come into this, following the same line, that we're doing things that are regulating stormwater. Why do we not think about doing things that regulate supplying water to make water available? Wendy asked the question about gray water. You could imagine that there would be at least some situations where there might be a fair amount of gray water that could be captured, which is currently not being.
Do you think Las Vegas was thinking of gray water in any way, or just thinking about ways to make your toilet bowl smaller?
Actually, they had a lady that took the job over, and she's still there, about 20 years ago, and she tackled it like she was killing snakes, and has done a tremendous job. And she and her department, they consider everything.
Mm-hmm. My guess is that getting rid of lawns in Las Vegas was probably the biggest saving they could.
Yeah, but even with that, you're only down to, I've got a good friend that is a member of a country club in downtown Henderson, and they did two things. They added 9 more holes, and then they reduced 60 acres of grass. They took it out and put in shrubs, desert-type shrubs, and
Xeriscaping, kind of.
Pardon me?
They call it. Well, I was thinking xeriscaping.
Well, yeah, except
pretty much.
it's more sporadic.
It's more deserty.
Yeah, it's more deserty, I guess. Anyway, when they were all done on this particular golf course, all they were able to do was hold the line as far as, and they were concerned about payment. How much did they have to pay
The water.
for the water that they were using? And they were able to hold the line, but they weren't able to reduce their water bill.
I'd be curious if somebody could make a comparison between, of course, Las Vegas is at a big scale, but they're seeing their water go right away from them. I mean, every year you just go out to the dam and see that it's going down. It's now 75 feet, it's now 80 feet, it's now 100 feet. And so, I mean, they can see it. We don't. We just listen to our report guys, and they say, well, it went down, 5 feet this year, but we don't see it. And when you go out there to Lake Mead, you really... It's pretty shocking, for me at least. I just had done this in the last year, and I had seen pictures of it, but to see that the lake is not there anymore.
Right now they have essentially two water lines that take water out of Lake Mead and ship it to Las Vegas. I believe they're within 12 feet of the top one as far as water going down, and not that far, so they are in the process of investing. I have it said how many millions of dollars to come in under Lake Mead to put in a whole new...
Let's draw lower down in the soup. Yeah.
Well, as low as it goes. I mean, once you get down to the bottom, you're at the bottom. But they're doing a lot of things. Conversely, Atlanta is not. They have a
lot of rain. So
they have a lot of rain, but their problem apparently is still the same, because apparently the problem is not, in most places, it's wind. when do you use the water, not necessarily how much or how much comes down, but when does it come down? And, there again, Vegas doesn't get any. Doesn't hardly come down in Vegas. Atlanta gets a lot, but they get their water upstream. And they've got essentially the same problem as far as cubic dollars to rectify the situation.
There's another question of if you're going to capture surface water, how is it going to be affected by water rights, downstream water rights? If you start damming up everything and don't allow water to go downstream,
Can you get permission to do that?
yeah, is that feasible? I mean, do we have water rights? Are we allowed to do that? Or is somebody downstream going to sue us because you're not letting our water come by?
Is anybody irrigating out of our river?
Some, but I mean, the Palouse River gets irrigated between Colfax and Palouse.
Yeah, okay, but
benches there.
I guess, I don't know where our little South Fork goes into the
So there may or may not be claims on it is the question.
Yeah, and not necessarily just claims locally, but claims farther down. How much water can you hold up without having some sort of legal problems?
Or how much can you pump out?
So I guess what I get from all of these is this graph. The well keeps going down. Every year we see this chart again, and it's got one more data point. And maybe the curve is flattening, but that doesn't tell me it goes on forever. It just tells me that we can pump some amount of water, and we'll finally find what that limit is. In the upper aquifer, we know we've overpumped it, and we backed off, and it recharged. And somewhere, I think it was in maybe the opening screens to that second paper. In 2012, is that when we had the pump problems? One of our wells went out.
Well, 9.
And the Wanapum goes vroom. So we must have shifted pumping very hard into the shallow aquifer, and then it's been slowly coming back over the last couple of years since that. So that was great. We had that big repository of water. When we lost one of the other wells, we could use that repository, but that's only episodic. You got to keep paying the piper by letting it build up again. So from the standpoint of our work, what is the aggressive water conservation, and which pieces of it are planning and zoning pieces versus which pieces are other parts of the city's operations?
I don't know that.
And I don't know that you know the answer to that.
I know that any
but
of them are planning and zoning commission questions at this point in time until the council.
The most
requests the
aggressive
commission to look at.
conservation thing you can do is marginal cost pricing, because that's what will get people to, how much does it cost to build a reservoir to capture water, and how much, and that should be in the price today. That we should be charging marginal cost, not average cost.
And I think the real question will be presented when adjudication comes to the basin. That's really going to be, we have twice the water rights than what we're currently producing. So we have essentially double the legal right to produce and utilize twice what we're currently producing today. So legally, we have all the rights entitled. Now, whether the resource is there, obviously, is a different question. But I would expect that the question about aggressive conservation and other strategies and understanding the basin, quantifying the resource in the basin and divvying it up among all the water right holders, depending upon who is senior to who, is a conversation that will happen when adjudication, which we expect within the next 5 years, begins to occur in this basin. And prior to that, I don't know. The council hasn't spoken of any aggressive conservation activities before that point. And at this point in time, beyond promoting smaller lots that result in lower irrigation demand, that can help reduce the outdoor irrigation. That's probably approximately 30% of total production today.
And during the time when there's the least amount of, I mean, when,
Where there's less
right,
supply.
you have increased evaporation and et cetera. I mean, a lot
Right.
of.
So that's a significant strategy that ultimately, I think, and we've had a lot of compact developments that have occurred over the course of the last 5 or 7 years. And so I think those are certainly positive. Indoor conservation certainly deals with water-consuming appliances, fixtures, and that's a large component of probably the aggressive indoor conservation, and that's in the water department's hands right now. And that water conservation plan, which will include the toilet exchange program and other appliance rebates and others, will be coming forward within the next, I'm going to guess, 6 months. So that will probably be the city's action, at least in the current time period. Now, pricing and the tiered water rates, and whether we want to revisit those or changing structures will probably happen in the next go-around of the utility rate studies to test that. But at this point in time, I don't know that I see any direction from the council as policymakers for the city to suggest that this body take any action on land use policies to conserve water or to do aggressive conservation actions. And my responsibility is to continue to promote compact developments that reduce irrigation demands, and new developments tend to have, they're obviously going to be constructed with the current standard plumbing fixtures for water conservation, whereas it's the older homes, the older units that really need to get in for the indoor fixture replacements.
And I wasn't suggesting that the council had spoken at all, but just wondering to what extent is it even in the ballpark of planning and zoning as opposed to in the ballpark of other parts of the city's operations?
I'm going to suspect that the city council and city leadership is developing a strategic plan, looking ahead of the future and challenges and needs, and I suspect water resources will be one of the number one items identified. So.
Okay. Great. Any other thoughts about the readings? Any suggestions about something you'd like to read next? A topic area or favorite author?
But before we just go away, I don't know if you have any sensibility of this, but are there other towns in Idaho of, let's just say 20,000 and up that are in a water condition like we're in? Are there some others? Or politically, that's something we haven't talked about at the Water Summit much. At least I try to go to all of them, and I haven't heard a discussion. But I just wonder what other. In other words, they're fighting where there's agriculture and you're using vast amounts of water. Then it's a big it's in the courts and all kinds of stuff about who gets to use what. But because we're kind of cut free from that because we don't irrigate. But I just wondered if there's other towns that you know about that have this kind of impending issue of because I don't think Coeur d'Alene does, and I don't think Lewiston does, and they seem to me to be in some kind of an alluvial place where there's actually water that's easier to get at, that it isn't at 800 feet.
I would suspect down the Snake River Plain you're going to have that.
I've wondered about that too, and that's why I was wondering about. As far as Idaho Falls goes, they can take water out and leave Lewiston low and dry.
The community that I think is kind of a comparable. It's not in Idaho, but in Washington, Walla Walla took action many years ago. Purchased the watershed to, I guess, it'd be the east of the community, and is actually doing ASR, active or aquifer storage and recovery, for their water uses. And so they were very aggressive, bought a significant portion of the watershed in a coastal town, and are injecting it into the groundwater and recovering it, and have been for quite some time. I don't know what led up to that, what were some of the challenges they were facing back before they established that system, but that's a community that's fairly close that's actually went out and purchased large portions of property in the watershed and forested areas, and then are managing an ASR program.
Interesting. Okay. Well, anything else for the good of the order? Thank you. So hopefully we'll see you at the Water Summit, and otherwise in 2 weeks.
All right, how's things over there on the